All right, you are on.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of October 5th, 2020 at approximately 5 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Here.
and Counselor Romana Beta.
Here. Okay, so thank you. We have a quorum. Next, we have approval of the agenda. As far as the agenda goes, item G under the consent calendar will be postponed. So we will not hear item G. Are there any other changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, changes from the committee.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify what G is, could you read what it is?
Yes, good call, absolutely. G is a request for approval of the budget adjustment resolution in the amount of $398,750.64 to pay back taxes to the IRS for the 2016 and 2017 tax years. That will be postponed.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a
Move to
motion
approve
and a
as
second.
amended.
As amended?
Yes, as amended. Thank you, Counselor Villarreal.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, so the agenda has been approved. Approval of the consent agenda. Are there items that the committee would like to remove from the consent agenda so we could hear them?
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman Villarreal.
I'd like to pull H for discussion.
Okay, anything else from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull E, F, and I'd like to pull H as well.
Did you say E and F?
Yeah. E as an elephant, F as in fish.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next item is approval of the minutes, the regular finance committee meeting of September 21st, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Any changes from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, so the minutes have been approved. We have presentations. We have two presentations. The first is on the FY20 internal audit, and then the second would be a benefits presentation. So we have items that got pulled from the consent agenda. So if the presenters can start with a brief 5-minute presentation, and then we could get into questions from the committee. Thank you. So let's start with the FY20 internal audit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give a brief introduction. Today we have joining us the chair of the city's audit committee, Stephanie Woodruff. In addition, we have Caitlin Gutierrez and Jessica Bundy from REDW, the team that performed the internal audit. As you all may remember, going back to the McCard report in 2017, the McCard report identified problems with the way the city was conducting the internal audits. And at that time, the council moved to co-source the internal audit function, essentially allowing the city to hire on a firm like REDW to perform these internal audits. So what we have before you tonight is the internal audit of the city's lease procedures. This is an item that we asked REDW to look into for us for two reasons. One, our staff did notice in the last few years some issues with our lease process and procedures, which we would like to begin correcting. In addition to that, we do have a major change in accounting standard beginning in FY22 in July of next year. So that's why we asked REDW to focus on this to ensure that we were in compliance with the new accounting standard. With that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to the chair of our audit committee, Stephanie Woodruff.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce, before I introduce REDW on this first audit, just a kind of a brief overview. We have been meeting monthly, and per the risk assessment for this year, the lease accounting was one of the top areas that we identified that we need to address because of the new GASB 87 rule in effect next July 2021. So they're going to present the report. There are several issues, and I'm completely satisfied with management's response. With that, then after this initial internal audit, we will be meeting with REDW on Thursday of this week to further discuss the 2020-2021 internal audit plan for the year. And I think it's going to focus on a lot of some of the issues identified during the CAFR review, and just a kind of a continuation on a lot of the issues that we've had over the past year. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and Caitlin at REDW. They've been our co-sourcing partner for this is the first year, and they've done an excellent job in terms of identifying the issues and leveraging a lot of their knowledge of the city of Santa Fe. And I'm just very happy with the relationship and look forward to continuing the relationship over the next year. So I don't know, Caitlin, are you gonna run here?
I will be kicking it off. So hi, everyone. Good evening. We appreciate everyone's time today. I apologize. It looks like I'm glowing right now. I can do nothing about the ceiling fan. So just add some nice lighting. Anyway, so as Stephanie and Mary introduced, this is the lease administration internal audit that we performed. It was performed due to changes that occurred from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board in 2017 on those lease accounting standards, which are referred to in this report as GASB 87. So the purpose of these changes is to assist with improving the comparability and decision-making information on a government's financial statements. There were several major changes identified, which the city is required to update by July 1st of 2021, which is the first day of the new fiscal year next year, in order to comply with those rules. So what our internal audit did was it sought to understand where the city is currently at with its lease portfolio, and then look at the surrounding internal controls to ensure they're on track for compliance with those GASB 87 rules. In a typical internal audit, we would have performed detailed testing to better understand the control environment. However, since many of those control issues regarding the lease process had been previously identified by the city, we determined detailed testing of current process would provide no benefit. Therefore, our focus shifted more towards working with the city to determine those next steps in achieving that compliance with the GASB 87 lease rules. So I would like to point out that since this report was released, the city has made strides towards implementing new controls and processes over that lease administration process, as well as the accompanying cash controls process. And I will have management kind of address some of those items that they have performed since we did this. So at this point, I would like to move into our first observation, which relates to the lease management piece of this and specifically addresses the need for the city to implement internal controls surrounding the lease administration process. So our internal audit highlighted various control deficiencies, including no centralized repository for leases, nor any written policies and procedures regarding lease management for when the city is either the lessee or lessor. In addition, many of the lease contracts that are currently in place are old and are lacking those necessary details to comply with those GASB 87 rules. Lastly, we found there was no individual or department responsible for ensuring lease revenues are collected timely. So we put this risk as high and recommend the city establish a GASB 87 implementation plan to ensure that they are compliant with the upcoming standards. As part of this plan, we recommend that they develop a complete lease portfolio as well as establish who maintains the information on each lease. The portfolio development should include specific parameters, such as how far the city wants to go back, or the impact of the dollar amount to determine, the amount of resources utilized to document the lease. Once that portfolio is in place, the city should work to identify the leases that are actually subject to the GASB 87 rules. They should then reevaluate those agreements to ensure all that necessary information is in place. And if not, new standardized agreements should be put in place when the old agreements do not comply. Next, they have identified the Munis financial system as their lease tracking software. So all leases should be input into that software and necessary calculations should be performed to ensure that compliance with GASB 87. They should then implement monitoring procedures to define how those leases will be monitored and who will be responsible. And finally, they should document those processes and formalize policies and procedures over both tracking and reporting components of the lease. So at this point, if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to management to discuss how they've addressed this observation so far and the plan moving forward.
Yes, that'll be great.
Great.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as Caitlin outlined, several areas that the city would need to improve upon in order to be in compliance with GASB 87. So, in general, what we can say is what Caitlin focused on, that we will be using our Munis system to become in compliance with GASB 87 for fiscal year 22, which begins in July of next year. We actually plan on starting that process in the current fiscal year and have created a working group specific to the GASB 87 implementation to ensure that we are on track to implement the recommendations that Caitlin and her team have included in this report. So it's extremely important, again, to really start at the basics for us to be able to identify and define all of the leases in the city and create the central repository. So our staff has, since we received these initial recommendations from REDW, our staff has already started that process. We, again, we have very specific compliance related issues with GASB 87, where we have to track the term of the lease, the type of the lease, et cetera. So that will also be going into the centralized repository. Again, the Munis financial system is really going to be able to, what is key to being able to implement this by FY22. So we are making sure that the different modules of the Munis system will be in compliance, be able to track the agreements, be able to track the payments as well that are owed to the city. I think that about covers it in general. The details are here in the report that we're reviewing with you and have also been posted online as well as emailed to each of the committee members. So with that, Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you to the second.
Great. Great. So our second observation on this related to lessor payments. So what we found was the city is utilizing an antiquated in-person payment method for lessor payments, and there's no mechanism in place to ensure that the lessors have been making correct payment amounts on a timely basis. In addition, we found there was no process in place to ensure that lease payments are appropriately applied to the correct receivable and revenue accounts. We again put this risk at high. However, we do acknowledge that the city has taken proactive steps towards remediating this observation, including a build out in Munis, which allows the city to send invoices electronically and have payments made electronically, which will be a huge improvement moving forward. Our recommendation here is the city implement controls over that cash payment window, which is currently in the main building. to ensure that the necessary information is compiled at the time of a payment, should it not be done electronically, so that people, staff at the city can make sure that they're identifying where that payment belongs and posting it correctly. Any cashier that is processing payment should also be required to attend training over the process, and policies and procedures should be developed to document controls in place. Lastly, we recommend a monthly review be put in place to review outstanding receivables to determine if any collection efforts need to begin. So again, I'll turn it over to Mary to do a brief summary of kind of the steps so far.
Thank you, Caitlin. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as soon as REDW started flagging these issues for the city, we started to take corrective action. So in doing this, we have developed the form that REDW recommended and conducted trainings for the cashiers working at the main office in City Hall. Again, what the form essentially does is collect all of the relevant information for the appropriate tracking and recording of the lease revenue coming into the city. And now that the city has implemented the month-end close process, what our Treasury Department is doing is reviewing the lease payments on a monthly basis. So those two pieces we've been able to implement already, given our current version of Munis allows for that. So I think this is really positive and beneficial. And throughout the last year, there have been a few instances, at least, where city staff working across departments, including the legal department, have actually flagged several issues where our leasees have not been paying, and we've been able to either collect or we've been able to take the appropriate legal actions. So this is really a beneficial process for the city, especially during budget shortfall time, where we really do need to ensure that the city is collecting all of the revenue that is due to the city. So again, this is one of the initial concerns that our team flagged when we started a few years ago, and this is part of the multiple steps in the corrective action to ensure that the city is properly receiving and recording the revenue for the lease payments that we are due. It's not just to be in compliance with GASB 87, but the recommendations that REDW has made here will ensure that we are in compliance by FY22 with our new accounting standard.
Great, and that concludes our report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councilwoman Romero-Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on this rule that we're implementing, GASB 87? Is that something that all cities are being asked to do? Are we behind in doing that? Are we right on time? Can you give us some more context about that rule?
Sure, absolutely. So it is applicable to all governments that follow the governmental accounting standards rules. So yes, definitely a major change government-wide. As far, I kind of touch on it more in the report, kind of about what GASB 87 entails and what's required. As far as the city's compliance with it, from what I'm witnessing, I think that they're right on track for making progress to compliance. With the global pandemic and everything, the due date has been pushed, so it's allowed governments more time. This, like I said, this is an extremely big change, so it has actually given governments more time to really sit down and get all this information figured out. So in my opinion, they are on track. I know that they're working very hard to get this information where it needs to be. So I feel confident that they will achieve that goal by the start of next fiscal year.
And we already use the proper accounting for a governmental entity. We're not having to make that change, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. And I apologize. I think I just want everyone to know we just got this report this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to read it in depth. So sorry about the question if you addressed it in the report.
Not at all.
We'll have time to get into that a little bit more deeply now that we have it. So thank you. Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
if you have, after you've read through the questions, if you have subsequent questions that you would like addressed, by all means, please feel free to contact us. We'd be very happy to answer them for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from the committee? Okay, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our audit chair, Stephanie Woodruff, and please pass on to the committee how much we appreciate the work that you all do for us and on behalf of the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and Committee. I appreciate that.
Okay, that concludes our presentation regarding the internal audit. Our next presentation is regarding our benefits. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is our regular update on where we are with our benefits administration. So with us tonight, we have Don Montano from Aon, who will be presenting our updated information. So I'll turn it over to Don.
Thank you. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am working on sharing my screen. Just want to confirm you all can see it. Okay. The report we're presenting to you, we had been on the agenda to present August 31st, and it is including the closeout of the prior plan year, July 2019 through June 2020, and then 1 month into the new plan year of claims information for July 2020. So on this page, the current plan year information is in the first column A, where you see 720 to 720. And then the prior plan year closeout information is in the column just to the right of that. So our enrollment stayed pretty consistent, but I think the important things to note in the current plan year is our funding down on row 7 for that 1 month was 1.636 million. That equates to $597.33 per member per month. Our total claims for the month of July in row 10 for medical and pharmacy came in at 1.602 million. Our fixed costs, if we look down, we didn't have anybody, we didn't have any stop loss claims for the month of July. So our fixed costs in row 13 were 163,000. So when we add that to the total paid claims, our total costs for the month of July were 1.765 million. So you can see for that 1 month, we're already at a deficit of 129,204 because our funding was 1.6 million and the cost exceeded that. The good news was in the 2019-2020 plan year did not end as rough as we thought it was going to be and as large of a deficit as we had projected. And part of that, well, that was primarily driven by the impact of COVID with members not being able to access healthcare providers due to many of the shutdowns. So you can see for the year, our funding in row 7 was 19.9 million. Our total in row 10, our total medical and pharmacy claims was 19,621,000. We did in row 11 have 1.1 million in stop loss reimbursements. So our net claims cost was 18,474,000. Our fixed cost for the year in row 13 was 1.87 million. So our total costs were 20,345,000. That left us with a deficit of $434,000. Any questions on this page?
Questions from the committee?
I have a quick question, John. And I don't know.
Councilwoman Sanchez and then Councilwoman Lindell.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm not sure. I looked at this a few days ago, and so I apologize if this is coming up. Do we have a comparison of what July 2020 and July 2019 looked like in terms of expenditures?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Cassette Sanchez. So I'm going to move to the next page, and that will answer this question. So in the top chart in row 1, you can see this is July 2020. And we have the number of subscribers in column D, the funding amount. Column F is the total medical claims. Column G is the pharmacy claims. And then column H is the total paid claims. When you look at the chart below, you can see in the first row, July of 2019. So you can see the differential there. Our medical claims in July of 2020 are down at 1.6 million. In July of 2019, our paid medical claims was 1.7 million. So they are down a little bit. It's still being impacted by COVID because people just are still continuing to delay healthcare that can be delayed. So essential healthcare, like people getting their dialysis or cancer treatments, are still continuing. But if somebody is needing a knee surgery and they can put it off, they're still continuing to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm so sorry that I jumped us ahead, but thank you for that.
No problem.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. And just a quick question from page 2, that our deficit was 434. What's our current reserve level?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, we can get that number to you. If you recall, during the budget, we utilized the reserve to pay for the deficit that we were anticipating having, which was higher than this 434,000, but it was also utilized to cover the increase of premiums. So instead of imposing the increase to employees, we used our reserve fund. So it's going to be right around, I would say, right around probably about 900,000, but we can get you the exact figures after working.
No, you don't need to. I was just looking for a ballpark figure of how fast we're going to burn through that reserve, which it's clear enough that we're going to.
Well, on that point, Councilor Lindell read my mind. Ms. Salazar, I think you do, though, need to keep us apprised as we go month after month, maybe every quarter, because as you stated, we did decide to not make major changes and access that cash reserve, so we wouldn't have to make those tough calls back when we did budget. So if you can keep us apprised of that, because I'm sure you're communicating with the unions, because what I'm afraid of, and what I was afraid of back when we did this, was that we are going to run out of reserve, and we may be looking at plan changes because we didn't make the tough call this past year. We may have to 6 months from now. So if you can keep us apprised of that, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. We will be presenting something after we receive the final September numbers for the quarter. And just to give you an update, we have been meeting with the Benefits Advisory Committee, which is comprised of all 3 union presidents. And we've had, I believe, 3 meetings since the budget was approved and the changes were made to the benefits.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to emphasize what you and Councilor Lindell have already said. I think that's part of the reason why we are having this report, is that we did want to monitor what was happening more closely because of how we use the reserves. So just want to join in that chorus that I think we need to see those numbers in addition to these numbers. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor Lindell, for bringing it up.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Salazar.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll keep moving forward. On Slide 5, this has our large claimants information. So, so far in the current plan year in July, we have one person who is hitting our radar for this. They've so far had a total claims of $188,281 paid. This is a person who had claims last year. You can see in the table below the July 2019 through June 2020. It was claimant number 3 with leukemia. Last year, they had 400,000 in paid claims. They did exceed the stop loss, so we did get some recovery from that. I would imagine we will continue to see this individual claim amount to rise as they are continue to be enrolled on the plan. On slide 6 is the dental program. So if you recall, last year the plan was running really well. We did not need to make any adjustments to the funding. The claims are still right on track from what we were seeing in the prior year. So so far this year, we've had a total of 87,000 in expenses. It's right in line with kind of averages of what we see for your total dental expenses each month. And that is everything, unless there's any further questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? No. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Salazar, Ms. Montano. We do, as Councilwoman Romero Worth said, look forward to your report after you close out the first quarter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the items that were removed from the consent calendar. The first was item E by Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, which is a request for approval of a budget adjustment resolution to the Public Utilities Wastewater Division to cover the negative balance in professional contracts in the amount of $70,000. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. The memo was just a little bit vague as to what the work that was being done that caused the increase. So I was hoping to hear more details about this work and why we needed an additional $70,000 to cover it.
All right, Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassette Sanchez. So the amount is for added work that was going to, let me start over. The actual amount is what they do for us is to look how our services relate to our rates so that we can do our rates for the next years going on. What ended up happening was the original budget, when it was put in for the temporary budget, it was covering it. And when the new budget was loaded up inside, it didn't have the total amount that we needed in there. So it was just an oversight on us. So it ended up turning it negative. It's a reoccurring, their contract. So all they really are taking care of is mainly how our spending and costs that we do for wastewater relate to the rates that we're charging.
Okay, so then if I'm understanding you correctly, there wasn't any change in the scope of work or the amount of work that they were performing, but this was a technical error due to some of the changes in our budgeting process this year because of COVID?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's informative. I appreciate that. That was all.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that item's been approved. The next item is item F, which is a request for approval of a budget adjustment resolution for Public Utilities Department to fund vacant positions through the 2020-2021 fiscal year in the total amount of $2,940,219.85 across 12 public utilities sections. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for joining us. First of all, I am excited to see, we've been talking a lot about the impact of being understaffed across the city. So I am happy to see that it looks like financially we can move forward with filling some of those positions. You had mentioned in here about, taking a conservative approach as you start to fill the positions, and I was hoping to hear a little bit more about that. I saw that our revenues in public utilities are actually increased from last year, which is promising. I do still just want to make sure that we're careful, as we don't really know what the pattern of the pandemic is going to be. Hopefully we are at a new normal. We'll be staying here for a while. We have figured out some ways to manage the pandemic, which is helping, but I do worry what could happen if we do see additional shutdowns. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more of that long-term plan from your perspective to make sure that we are not going to wind up in a situation where we are not able to fund these positions if we have another second wave that causes some real economic hardship.
Right. Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, members of the committee, thank you. I think that's a great question. So as we're working through budget development and taking a conservative approach, we worked very close with the finance department and developed targets based on the most current information at the time, putting a hold on the positions, putting a pin in those until we really understood what the impact was going to resonate through. And I guess apparently based on the item that was just approved, also cutting some of Mike Dozier's budget to meet those targets, were some of the approaches, right? Anything that we could put a pin in until more certainty was developing. Over the past really 6 months, really working with staff who already was looking at certain indicators, but how we monitored the data and how we ramped up that data entry. So really that's what developed the trends. So our public utilities financial section, our account specialist and our senior financial analyst, right, every week are monitoring data that comes in, getting the reports, keeping it up to date. I give a lot of credit to Jesse Roach from the Water Division that helps analyze that data, right? Develops the graphs, the trends that make the data usable with good visual indicators. So ultimately being able to look at one, or what are the billables, what are the water use, water drives, not just the water division's budget, but the variable cost for wastewater. Then of course billing. Billing is also driven by the amount of bills that come out. So just by looking at the water meter reads, 75% of the utility, I feel their revenues are driven off of those monthly reads. Environmental services has some pretty, I would say pretty advanced technology in the Rubicon tracking, where trucks are, how fast routes are done, being able to monitor tipping fees and manage their costs. So really over the past couple of years, some of the innovation that utilities has done to put some of these tracking metrics in place, I feel like we've really been able to leverage when hard questions came down about almost real-time revenues, and then truing those up against projections, working close with the financial department. So again, over the past, really the first quarter of the fiscal year, presenting this information to the financial team and the city manager, looking for a recommendation to come. And out of a lot of things that we put pins in, being able to get some of the vacancies posted and try to get more boots on the ground, people to provide the service, was one of the priorities that I've been working on to bring forward. And I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, I did. It was helpful to hear some of the innovations in your tracking and how that is assisting with budgeting. So I did appreciate hearing that. There are a lot of positions here. Are you going to move forward with filling them? I mean, are we looking at posting everything in the next month, 6 months? Are all of these on your list to be filled right now, or how are you going to be approaching that?
Councilor Cassett, I'm just really my approach is working with the divisions. So I'm representing all 12 sections, right, within the 4 divisions to get the budget posted. To be honest, that's probably one of the easier parts, right, that I can do to help to get budgeted. Some of these positions are hard to fill. So just getting them posted is not going to be enough. So we're working with our teams on widening the net. Some of these other positions do take a harder look. Right, really understanding why they're not filled. And so my division directors are working with the HR department to really understand, again, are these competitive wages? Are the minimum requirements really minimum requirements? So there are a few that we're still working with the HR department to hash out. Some will have to be aggressively searched. I think some can be filled and we can get some service. So I think it's a whole spectrum. And really, again, my part was if I could just help the divisions get budgeted, that's one more hurdle they get over when it just comes to posting or being able to offer a position.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I know that we just had this conversation in Public Works about having a hard time filling engineers because it's such a specialized position. Hi, I'm sorry, he just got home. So is eager to see me. But I do appreciate you guys taking a look at the competitiveness and how we can make sure that we get these positions filled once we get them funded. So I have no other questions. I really appreciate you taking the time to illustrate this a little bit further for me.
Okay, other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman Villarreal.
just a quick question on the matrix that you provided us with the breakdown of the potential jobs that would be unfrozen and that we would try to fill positions. One of them under wastewater, it said collections, and that's by far the largest request. That's 9 positions. Can you remind us what collections was again? I mean, in relation to wastewater, I was trying to figure out if it had to do with SWAMA or can you clarify that? No, actually SWAMA is under environmental services. Can you just remind me what that was?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal. So within the wastewater, the collection system is the underground piping infrastructure. So our collections team are the Vector trucks, the rodders, maintaining the pipelines and reporting to stoppages and overflows.
So we've been down 9 positions for that?
That is correct.
For how long have we been down 9? Was that even previous to COVID?
Councilor Villarreal, it is previous to COVID. I would say, so probably anywhere from 6 to 8 positions vacant within that section. So they are established with, I guess, what we would really reframe as like a career ladder. So as you look at those postings, when you see a basic position would be a level 1 certification. And so some of those vacancies are being filled by us hiring really uncertified operators, putting them on a team and then helping them get certified through the environmental department. The hope is that the entry levels that we have, which I believe are around 5 or 6, that many of those individuals will move into the basic. If we can attract some from outside, that will also be great. But by doing that, you still have to backfill the entry level to actually have more people. But right now our need is in that certified operator level. I feel we have several lead, which are level 2 certified operators, and entry level, right, the individuals driving the trucks, and we're needing kind of that mid-range, some experience in wastewater that we've been working to train and develop those entries for.
So is that the field operator basic that you're referring to?
That is correct.
7 positions, I think. 1, 2, 7 of them. Okay. I think that's it. Just wanted to understand the difference between the various positions on that matrix. That was helpful, by the way, to just provide us a spreadsheet to understand which positions you're considering. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion regarding item F?
Move to approve?
Second,
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Sig Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so that item passes. We are on to item H, which is a request for approval of a lease agreement between the City of Santa Fe and the Interfaith Community Shelter Group, Pete's Place, located at 2801 Cerrillos Road for a 4-year term. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Mr. Chair, I have quite a few questions, so I'll try to go through various aspects of the lease. I think the reason why we really wanted it to go through committee is, well, that's the normal process for one. And I think it just works out some of the nuances that we needed to understand, breaking it down. And I think it also just helps the public understand what are those pieces in this particular lease that changed and what was similar to the last lease. So I think it was a matter of just making sure we go through our due diligence. And it is unfortunate and very frustrating to me, and I think my colleagues, to get this so late and to get it at council so late, the day before the lease was going to expire. So I think that that's an important piece to note, that there's various aspects and reasons probably why this happened. I'm not going to try to figure out who's to blame for it, other than here we are. We're not closing the shelter. We're not, I don't think we are endangering any services that are needed to occur in the shelter. I think we just have to do our due diligence to make sure that all the pieces of the lease make sense to us, and also trying to kind of figure out what are some of the like larger systemic problems we're dealing with that are also connected to the shelter and also related to what the city needs to do. And so I just want to have a conversation about that, and I'll try to be on top of all the things I have to ask staff. But I think it would first be helpful to have our attorneys go through specifically some of the changes that took place in this lease agreement, so that we all understand what changed from the last one. And so we understand what the implications are for those changes and the justifications for those changes. So I don't know who's on with us right now, but it would be helpful to just walk through.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, Andres Salazar was a part of the staff that helped with the lease where we shepherded through, so she can answer your legal issues.
Sounds good.
Oh, you can't hear her. We can't hear you, Andrea.
We still don't hear you.
You're not shown as being muted, but we can't hear you. Still no. Joe, do you have any idea what's going on?
Oops, she's jumped off. Councilor Villarreal, can we go to the next question? Maybe we can wait till.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe this one you might be able to answer, or Kira Ochoa may be able to answer. There was a change that you could probably describe to us that I think is extremely important that was added into this agreement as it relates to the use of premises. It was specifically about the leasee participating in the coordinated entry system via the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. If you could just describe what that system is, why it's important, who's part of it, and if the shelter had been part of it initially, and why only at a minimum of 25% of clients.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal. Coordinated entry is a system used nationally by all shelters that receive HUD funding. And it is operated locally by the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. It's essentially a data collection system and a way of getting people housed. So in our Built for Zero work, we've referred to it something called a by name list. Essentially, a good coordinated entry system provides a comprehensive list of everyone who's homeless in our community and prioritizes them in terms of getting housed and asks the community to work together to essentially case manage them to figure out what they need to get housed. Do they need an ID? Do they need a psychiatric evaluation? Do they need, Social Security? And the coalition hosts monthly coordinated entry meetings. And basically, we're working with our partners in the homeless services community to get that system to be even more functional than it's been. I think it's not always easy for providers to see the benefit of participating in that, and especially a shelter like Interfaith, which sees so many people every year. It's such a high volume, and some people are only there for one day out of the entire year. They might come for 2 or 3 days. I know of people that take the bus down from Taos and can't afford to stay in a hotel and stay at Pete's for their medical appointment and then go up. But there are a portion of people that are what we would call chronically homeless who stay at Pete's. And those are folks that have been homeless for more than 12 months. And those are the folks that we wanted to formally invite the shelter to case manage with our partners, to ask them to really put concerted attention on housing those folks. What would they really need to get housed? And the shelter has been a tremendous partner in doing this informally in one way or another, but this solidifies sort of a formal request that they attend those meetings, that they identify at least a quarter of their people that are potentially chronically homeless. There's a whole series of qualifying information that need to be completed, questionnaires, et cetera, that qualify people for vouchers, which then can get them into permanent supportive housing if they have behavioral health issues. And so it's really an invitation, a requirement that Pete's participate in that system of ending chronic homelessness. That answers your question.
Yes, it does. And why only a minimum of 25% of clients versus trying to capture a larger percentage of their clients that utilize the shelter or have been, as you said, chronically homeless?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think it's a beginning of what we would like to see happen. This lease does not offer financial incentive to do that other than the incentive of having the facility itself. And the capacity issues at Pete's are real in terms of what the staff deal with. And so this is a bump up from what we've been requiring them to do. And it's something that we didn't feel was appropriate to ask for more than a quarter of their people. Also, a quarter of their people might be about right for how many people are chronically homeless there, right? So it's kind of a beginning of a way to bring them into that fold. There's a data system, that we were kind of asking them to participate in maybe down the line when they do have more capacity, but this is a way to address them doing what they've said they would want to do all along, which is, put themselves out of business by solving homelessness. And, that's kind of the focus of that part of the lease. Hope that answers the question.
Yes. And so wait, you mentioned something about the financial aspect of it, of participating in the coordinated entry system. What do you mean by that?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, it's labor intensive to do this kind of participation. It's not just coming to a meeting once a week. It's really working intensively with clients. It's doing a lot of, there are a lot of assessments that are required and that kind of thing. And so we're not paying them to do that. And so we're asking them to do that, as contributing with us in that effort to address homelessness in the community.
Well, I think it's an important piece because obviously, sure, it's labor intensive, but there's an ultimate goal in getting people housed and tracking individuals that are chronically homeless and making sure that we're seeing if there's transition happening. And I think that's important to note. And so I guess when I think about that, I know it's a lot to run a shelter and there's a lot of things that we don't know about, but simultaneously, we also give quite a bit of money through our other grants, our grant support. And remind me what the amount is that we give annually through our grants program to Interfaith Shelter.
Mr. Chair, Councilman Villarreal, we give Interfaith $150,000 annually for safety net services and navigation. And so they are using they're part of our Connect network. They have an incredible navigator at Pete's who enters as many people as possible into Unite Us and then refers people out into other services in the network. And so that is the annual fee, and we have a 2-year contract with them currently that ends in 21.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think it's just goes to show you that that is the investment that we put in to the shelter because we think it's an important service, obviously. I mean, that's not a small change, that's a substantial grant and it's important, and that's why we do it. So I just wanted to highlight that. I guess this falls into, did we get back our other staff? Where's Andrea? Are you there? Yes. Can you hear me now?
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you. Okay. So Andrea, can you walk through the high level aspects of the lease agreement so that we know what has changed? And I'm not saying just the substantial changes, but just even some of the tweaks we've made in response to some of the things that we think have been important for us to consider as the city, and maybe just walk us through that piece, the different aspects. Thank you.
Sure, Chair, committee members, one of the things that you heard earlier tonight was about the GASB program and modernizing our leases. So first and foremost, we're trying to take all of our old leases and transition them into modern leases so that they all have similar terms. And we're talking about both our commercial leases and our in-kind leases. So that is one of the most important steps of us as a lease team to move forward. So in doing that, we did take and look through the original lease that was entered into 4 years ago, and we made substantial changes to make sure that it's in the format that we want it to be in moving forward. One of those substantial changes to this was about use of the premises. So in most of our leases, like in the Santa Fe recovery lease that we have conditions for utilizing our premises. This wasn't quite fleshed out in the original lease. In the original lease, it said that the permitted use was for homeless people and that there was language about tenant improvements. And those were the only 2 sections that were in the use of premises. In the lease that you have in your packet before you, there is an itemized use of premises and conditions for use. And one of those items you were just talking about with Director Ochoa about the coordinated effort of using the assessment tool. The other provisions that we have in there are about who is coming into the program so that we know and we have some type of tracking as to what the criteria is for the individuals who are going to Pete's Place. We also have delineated a rent section that talks about what the in-kind services are so that there's some type of assessment tool for the lease team to utilize when they're ensuring that Interfaith is providing their rental amount. So we wanted to divide that out and make this a tool for lease, whereas the grant is a tool for the community services division. So that is why we placed these provisions in here. So some of these provisions are ensure clients are from underserved communities with a priority serving low and very low income households. Must meet the service guideline as delineated in the rent section. Only leasees, clients, and staff are allowed to reside at the premises, no one else. No individuals who are acting in a way that is a danger to others shall be allowed to remain on the premises. Leasee will seek assistance from St. Vincent's or other appropriate service providers for individuals who are a danger to themselves. Just things in the lease that we felt were necessary to ensure the safety of the environment. Additionally, we have provisions like leasee shall deploy security cameras, leasee shall staff the premises 24 hours a day and 7 days per week, and leasees, residents, and staff shall be advised to park where they should park, just so that we are delineating what is going on in this premise and how we would like it to be used. We also have delineation of improvement of the premises, trade fixtures, repairs and maintenance, compliance with laws. Those items are specifically identified in this lease and underneath our premise. So there isn't necessarily a huge change, but we're reformulating the way that we look at a lease. And that is really why they look so different. The rent provision is something that did change, and it didn't change drastically. What we did was, because this lease is to serve indigent populations, their health and welfare, which is an exception to the anti-donation clause, we wanted to make sure that we had a base amount that we were requesting as a lease amount. But since there was a 2010 appraisal that the previous lease was based on, we did a 12.5% increase to that amount and placed that amount into the lease as the base rent amount, and that's in section 5. We could, get a fair market value appraisal, but at the end of the day, this leasee is meeting and exceeding their expectations in base rent amount. And so we felt comfortable that this is their base rent. But that could change, and if the committee desired for us to get an appraisal and move forward with that, we could do that. Let's see, what other things have changed?
Andrea, Mr. Chair, if I can ask Ms. Salazar to talk about the lease terms, the 4-year versus 10.
So the term itself in the original lease was a 1-year term with 3 options of renewal. So 3 1-year options to renew. And we had originally drafted the lease to do a 1-year term with another 3 options to renew. In our negotiation process, when we sent it back to Interfaith's attorney, they said we want a longer term, and they originally wanted a longer initial term with 3 longer terms, which I believe would have been either 9 or 10 years in total. We wanted to shorten that amount, but we understood their concern that they had explained that to contract with different parties, they needed a longer term. And so we said we don't want to exceed 4 years. We're trying to do a lot of different things in the city. The Built for Zero is one of them, but trying to find a more permanent solution for homelessness. And so we did come to the 4-year term. That is also something that if this committee is recommending a change in that term, we can make a change and communicate with the parties to move forward and see if they can move forward with a change in the term. But that is why we have this one block 4-year term. We're also trying not to exceed 4-year terms in all of our leases. So that's kind of our area in our current leases. We have tons of leases that go for 20 years, 30 years, 90 years, and we're trying to restrict it to 4 years so that we have more control over our leases.
Thank you. So there was a question last week from Councilor Rivera about inspections and making sure the facility is up to code. And I know we had gotten a response, but maybe you could just say it, because this is public meeting, to just express what was discovered from that question and just to clarify what, who would have done that, making sure that they're up to code, and when did that occur?
Chair, committee members, I believe that Interfaith did respond and state that last year they did do some development on the site. They did change the structure of the interior of the building and had to have a fire inspection. I believe Chief Babcock might have some more information that he could provide for us.
I do, thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal. So Pete's Place Interfaith Shelter had a inspection done on September 30th, 2019 with no infractions. That was done by the city's fire marshal. So Councilor Rivera brought up the point that the state fire marshal the city doesn't inspect their own buildings. There is a written agreement between the state fire marshal's office as well as the city's fire marshal, retired Ray Gonzalez, that have a written agreement that the city would be allowed to do some inspections on city buildings as well as the city's interfaith shelter. So there was an inspection with no infractions completed on 9/30/2019, and then another one for their annual inspection because of the assembly business type on 10/1/2020 with one reinspection request being needed, and that's an interfaith shelter needs to provide documentation that their alarm system has been maintained.
And when was that last inspection? What was the date you said?
10/1/20, so it should be an annual inspection. 2019 it was done on 9/30, and then in 2020 it was done on 10/1.
So October 1st
That's
was
correct.
done after our council meeting, basically.
It was the Thursday after the council meeting, but it was one day overdue from the 9/30/19 inspections for the annual inspection to be completed.
Got it. Okay. So what I was trying to figure out, and I was looking at the lease about repairs and maintenance, and that the leasee shall be responsible for the most part, is what I understood, in keeping and maintaining the premises in good and clean condition, and that they're up to code with those repairs and maintenance. But maybe legal can explain to me, we have a different circumstance for other buildings that we lease out. And so I'm trying to figure out the difference between this and say like, I think the example you gave me, Andrea, or I don't know where I got this, but like La Familia, there's a different kind of agreement and understanding about repairs and maintenance. And I want to understand where our responsibility is for this. And if we have, how do we know repairs and maintenance are done annually? Or what's the check, what's the mechanism to make sure that those things are done properly?
Chair, committee members, so under the original term of this lease, under repair and maintenance, this lease, what has been and is continuing to be that leasee at its sole expense shall keep and maintain the premises and shall make tenant improvements as necessary in accordance with the use of premise. We've moved forward with having that same provision in this lease. And I do understand that there are different terms in our, sorry about that, in our different leases. What we are moving forward and attempting to do is make sure that repairs and maintenance as well as utilities are placed upon the leasees, not upon the city. And so while I don't actually know the terms off the top of my head for La Familia or exactly why we would repair and maintain that. I know that under the Market Street condo, the portion we own, and then there's condo responsibilities. We maintain some of those things. I think every piece of property is complicated, probably is how I should premise this. And so each lease dictates how those repairs and maintenance get done. Some of our older leases have provisions that the city is maintaining the maintenance. Right now, we don't have a way to check, and I'm saying an itemized way of saying every year we're checking and seeing if the repairs and maintenance have been done correctly. We're leaving that responsibility on CID and when they get permits and processes. The only check we're really doing is when the fire marshal checks and inspects. So there isn't a provision in here that has that expressly, but they have to be in compliance with the municipal code, local, state, federal regulations. And so that is what we are putting upon them, is that they are in compliance.
Thank you. There is language though that says that we reserve the right to inspect the premises at any time. So we do have potential. Would that be the city or would that be CID that does that? The inspections.
Chair, committee members, it could be the city. So under Midtown, when you're looking at the Midtown campus itself, we do have a property manager who is inspecting when we have tenants on that property, who is updating different tenant improvements or is reviewing tenant improvements. Currently, for all of our leases, we don't have the same measures, and that's why we're really trying to work on this lease management and move forward with having one way of moving forward and who interacts with what portions of the lease. But that has not been established for this lease yet.
Okay, but the way it's worded now, we do have the right to inspect if needed.
Chair, committee member, yes.
Okay, and since we've already done the inspection recently, and then they had improvements and upgraded their kitchen, then the entire building should be in compliance, right? It's not just that section of where they're making an addition, it's the entire building that gets inspected. Is that right, Chief?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Villarreal, that is correct. So when we do our annual inspection, it's the entire building, not just any renovations or any improvements to the building. It would be the entire building, old and new.
Okay, thank you. And you know, I think we want to know this because this is really specifically for the safety of clients. You know, it's not like we're trying to find something wrong. We don't want to have anything wrong with the building that is already an older building that needed improvements from the very get-go. And so I think the improvements have helped with the space and even with some of the limitations of that space. So I just want to make sure we're tracking that aspect. Let's see, the other question I had was, I think it's really just the, well, there's another piece that you were talking about parking and that who gets to park in the structure. Leases, residents and staff shall be advised to park only in the on-site parking lot or in other lawful locations. Can you define lawful locations? And does that apply to volunteers that frequently, that daily come to the shelter, and where do they park?
Chair, committee members, in terms of this provision, we, are requesting that anyone who's working with Pete's Place park on the premise. It was brought to our attention that there is parking a couple doors down that a lot of staff and volunteers utilize during the day. And so we were trying to ensure that there isn't an overgrowth of parking in the area. Instead, it's on site or in parking lots that allow parking.
So are those agreements with, where are those parking spots? Because most of the time I've seen and also have gotten complaints about is that volunteers are parking in places that are, businesses that didn't approve it, or in places that may not be safe for their cars. I don't know. I'm just trying to understand where we're setting the parameters, because I think that's an important piece. And the fact that the parking lot's not that big. And so I wanted to understand, although I've never seen it full. So can you elaborate on that?
Chair, committee members, I do not actually have the answer to that. I think that the leasee would probably be the best person to answer exactly where they're directing their volunteers or staff to park. We just wanted to identify that they needed to be either in the parking lot or in lawful locations. And so if they have agreements with other businesses, we probably are not privy to that. We could ask to be privy to that, but we were solely trying to ensure that they weren't parking anywhere unlawfully.
Right.
Mr.
I don't
Chair,
know.
Council Villarreal?
Yes.
I was going to ask if Ms. Ochoa could maybe address that because she works very closely with the shelter and maybe can get an answer from them. I don't think that the director's on this panel tonight.
I did invite both Joe Jordan Branis, the executive director, and their counsel. So I don't know, Joe, if you can let.
Oh, let's see it. He's here. I
They
see
would be
ICS
better able to
director.
answer the parking question.
Councilwoman Villarreal, did you want the director to?
Yeah,
answer?
I think it would help just to hear directly from, I don't know, is it Joe that's on or who's on?
Yes. Mr. Chair, Council Villarreal, we use the parking lot here, but we also, some of our volunteers park on Rafina Street and walk.
And are those private parking spaces or?
They're legal on the street.
Oh, on the street, okay. So is there a way that actually everybody could park in your lot? Including volunteers?
Well, these days, we have plenty of spots because we've lost a lot of our volunteers. So that's not an issue. So at this particular point, but it has been an issue in the past, but most of the volunteers do park here. We make sure we park them in various arrangements in order to get everybody in as much as possible. But there have been a few volunteers, like you said, who have utilized other people's parking spaces. But for the most part, if anybody's off-site, they will park their car, and it's not that many on Rafina, which is legal parking.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that is a walk for them, but that's fine. I guess I'm wondering if there's a way that you could actually fit everybody on there in the lot that you have right now.
Right now, we don't have any problems fitting people in.
Right, but like when we are in kind of an other settings, not COVID settings, but.
Right. Well, we did try to negotiate with a neighborhood parking business, and I don't know exactly where that is. You know, I know where that is. I don't know where that's at this particular point, but we did look over one of the businesses down Cerrillos to see if we could buy some slots from them.
Yeah, I think that that's an important piece because we do get complaints about that. And then simultaneously, there's a lot of activity happening around the shelter that I think we need to work on for this aspect, for this piece.
Right.
I'm going to switch over since we have Joe to talk about the security. There's language in the lease about deploying security cameras at the premises. And I would really like to understand, are those cameras that are specifically like for internal purposes, or are they actually cameras outside that can not patrol, but actually capture what's happening outside of your gates?
First of all, 98% of the property is covered by security cameras. Also, in response to the neighbors, we have cameras both on Jorgensen and on Harrison, so that we can see the activity in both those locations. So,
And so does the police department have access to the cameras if needed for investigations?
we share the camera videotape with them all the time. Whenever they're investigating an incident, looking into anything, we share that with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. But that's not a new piece of this contract, is it? To have security cameras on the premises?
Well, I don't believe it was ever in our lease agreement, and Dan, maybe you could answer that question better than I, but now it is in our lease agreement, but it's not a problem because we value the security cameras, we value the system, we use it all the time, and we work when necessary with the police department, to give them the zip drive of what took place.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Your mute is on, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Funny how your finger clicks when you really actually want to talk. So sorry about that. I think what I'm trying to, the next piece of this is kind of the elephant in the room that we don't want to talk about it's a challenging piece to probably any place in the country right now that have shelters that are people that are very much in need of services and our clients. And then what's happening outside of premises, out of the premises that aren't the responsibility, quote, of the shelter and of interfaith. And I think what we're seeing is just we have to acknowledge there is a symbiotic relationship between what's happening in the shelter and the protection of the clients and what's happening outside, whether it's those folks that have been thrown out and are not able to use the shelter because they have not followed the rules. And what I've been seeing, because I live close by there, is, and I'm hearing also from businesses and neighbors of the, folks that are there's activities happening that are not conducive for the protection of clients. They're not conducive for the protection of the neighbors and the businesses. And so what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know how it fits into this particular negotiation of the lease, but we're trying to figure out how to solve the problems of nefarious activities happening outside of the shelter, i.e. right outside of the boundaries of the shelter. And we hear different things like, no, it's not our responsibility, it's outside of the premises. Well, legally, yes, that's true. However, it is the responsibility because it's also, I think, and see that these unsavory characters outside of the shelter are also preying on the folks that really do need the services. And so there's this like balance, like how do we make this work? Then simultaneously, we're hearing about how there's not a response by the police department and that it's not timely. Sometimes they don't show up at all. And that's what's sometimes happening at the shelter and also what's happening in the surrounding neighborhoods. So I'm just trying to figure out, and I think my colleagues, especially Councilor Lindell, are struggling with is trying to find a balance so that everybody feels safe. The clients in the shelter, the neighborhood that was well established there before even the shelter came into play, businesses that have been there before the shelter was actually located there. And so it's really hard for me to try to figure out what the solution is because it's, as I keep saying, these systemic problems that we deal with as it relates to housing insecurity, as it relates to intergenerational poverty. And so I'm just wanting to see how we all are going to kind of work on this together, because since I've been on council, this has been the ongoing elephant in the room. And I think there's been short-term ideas of ways that we could make the area safer with lighting, with sidewalks, but that's not really dealing with the bigger picture and how to work on behavioral health issues, as well as trying to make sure that PD responds in a timely manner. So, and I don't know who's going to answer this question because it does relate to the lease and it makes me think various things. One, there's been issues with the location, not because of where it's specifically located in a neighborhood, which I think is problematic on some level. I think what also I see is the shelter itself, the facility, given the amount of folks experiencing homelessness and what kind of services we need, that there need to be other locations too that we need to be able to provide that is not just this particular shelter. In addition, we've had deaths because of the fact that this shelter is located during or near a very busy roadway. And so I'm always trying to figure out like, what have we thought about other than the bigger picture of like systemic problems and how to solve them, but also like if we've ever actually thought about a location that's large enough to fit the needs right now, what other things we could think about. Because when I first understood about the shelter, it was never going to be the permanent fix for homelessness. And this location wasn't necessarily a permanent location that we thought would solve all the issues. So I don't know, Kira, I'm not sure who can answer this question, but I really do want to try to figure out how we can start thinking. I mean, I know we have this program that we're trying to implement with the Built for Zero. It just, right now, I don't feel like it's working. And I know it takes time, and I know that it's slow going, but you know, just the fact that people in a neighborhood shouldn't feel like they have to live in fear and they can't even walk outside their sidewalks, or they've been threatened. I mean, I don't think any of us would want that. And because we don't live right there, we don't understand it. And people think that that's not important, but it is important, because people in neighborhoods are important, as well as the clients that are in the shelter needing services. And then we need PD also to be part of this solution. So I'm kind of on my soapbox, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out what we can do, because we're all in this together, and the shelter is also part of this. And so is our police department, and so is our service providers, and our neighborhoods. And so I don't know if anyone has some insight to this, but it's really hard to deal with. And I don't even live on Harrison Road, so I wouldn't know what it's like every day.
Ms. Ochoa, do you want to start?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think you gave a very comprehensive, picture of all of the issues and how tied into each other they really are. I think that one of the things that we've been able to identify, as a need in our Built for Zero work, for example, is we really have a gap in terms of coordinated street outreach in Santa Fe. So we have wonderful street outreach workers sort of working independently, but we also have a very strapped system. So some of them also do work at Pete's with clients at Pete's. And what we don't have is folks going into the surrounding areas around Pete's and beyond to really forge those relationships with people. I mean, we have those folks, we just don't have enough of them. It's a hard job, it's hard to keep them, and we don't have enough of that happening. So I think that putting all of that onto the shelter is not realistic. That's something that the whole community needs to come together on. And I think that we're beginning to do that. One of the things we're going to be purchasing with our CARES Act money in the short term is this mobile hygiene unit. We know that there have been a lot of hygiene issues in the surrounding businesses. The mayor and I went to visit a business that was being affected by people, using their front porch as a toilet, and it's really not okay. I completely agree with you. So this unit will help address some of those needs, as well as, providing a way for providers who serve homeless folks to work together to say, oh, that's my guy, I know who that person is, let me take that person, and that's and let's get them on coordinated entry. Let's find out who they are, what they need. Not every issue can be addressed by outreach, by case managers, as you know, some of them are police matters. And so getting our new community health and safety department, where we're all aligned toward addressing this problem that hasn't gone away, I think is another very hopeful short-term, something on the horizon for the short term. And certainly I hope the task force will address some of this as well. I think that, it's a very tough problem because we also have a complete, as many of you know, an utter dearth of high quality behavioral health services in Santa Fe. And a lot of that is a result of, what happened with the so-called behavioral health massacre that occurred in the previous governor's administration. So another hopeful, sign on the horizon is the county's crisis center, which will enable EMTs and police to respond to somebody in crisis on the street, whether it's a drug issue, a mental health issue, both, and bring them to a place where they can be stabilized, where they can be assessed what's really going on, what's the really most appropriate place for them to be. The interfaith shelter operates as a de facto mental health institution. And that's just too much to put on a shelter. And they, routinely bar people who are violent from their property. They're very diligent about it. They're very committed to protecting their guests, protecting the volunteers, and to the neighborhood. I mean, I will say that I think Joe and his folks can talk to the kinds of relationships they've forged with some people and then some businesses and others in the community, and others, that it's been harder to do that with. But I think that the sort of scope of your question is right on, because it's very complex. It has a lot of elements to it. And I will say that we are clear-eyed about what those elements are, and we are in the Community Services Department working on as much of those angles as we can. It's also remarkable to note that many people do go through PETES and they leave housed and employed. And that's a powerful testament to the need for PETES. We have, I think, 4 people that were recently permanently housed out of the shelter who went to hotels who got housed. So that does happen. We just need to give more resources to that actually happening and support that actually happening. And I think the pressure valves that we've created in standing up the Midtown shelter contribute as well to not having too many folks at PETES. And, as the lease shows, there's a limit to the property around PETES. And so it is a community issue. It's not on any one of the stakeholders to solve. I can say that we're working diligently with all the partners to come up with solutions. We're going to need a way to fund that mobile hygiene unit, by the way. We don't have operating expenses for it. Formulating a plan where, both government and private entities who are affected by homelessness can contribute to the operation of that. So, I could go on, and I don't want to take too much of the Finance Committee's time, but I hope that comes a little way toward answering the question. And I don't know if it's appropriate now to invite Joe to speak to any of that as well, or if you'd like that, Chairman, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Well,
Councilwoman Villarreal, what are your wishes?
Maybe just in a bit, we can hear from Joe. I think what I struggle with is, and these are all in District 1, St. Elizabeth Shelter and the Lifelink, we do not get complaints the way we get complaints happening at the Interfaith Shelter. And, I've asked about St. E's, about what they do differently, and they tell me, well, we don't know what's the difference. However, there's a few factors. They don't tolerate loitering, and they don't let anyone hang out, even outside of the property. So there's that. And then obviously there's a different type of clientele, and we know it's needed to have a wet shelter, and that's what Interfaith does. And Joe always says, come as you are. It does actually exacerbate some issues that I think other places don't necessarily have to confront. So what do you think makes the difference there? That St. E's doesn't have loitering and hanging out at all. We don't, and maybe Councilor Lindell can correct me, but we don't get many complaints about issues happening in and around the neighborhood. So I'm just trying to understand what makes that, what's different about it.
Chairman, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think you put your finger on it. It's PETES is a wet shelter. It's a place where people who have substance issues actively using are, able to come, and that has a kind of ring of concentric circles around it. And I think that, that does require a higher level of security and a higher level of attention than a place like St. E's. And, I think that it's true that I know that Joe's staff also does go out onto Harrison Street and does ask people to move along if they're not being good neighbors. And, there's just a capacity issue there as well. There's, where the people inside are very high needs, and people outside are even higher needs, and sometimes dangerous and violent. And so we have to, sort of understand that there's a limit to, I think, in my opinion, what can go on beyond the first circle. They're people are routinely taken from Las Vegas Behavioral Health State Hospital directly to Joe's doorstep. They don't have a psychiatrist on staff. They don't, they are dealing with an incredibly high needs population inside the boundaries of PETES. And so I think there's so much that they can do that they definitely attempt to do on the outside from my observation, volunteering and, you know, in other ways. But I think that, you know, again, I think it's the difference between a wet shelter and a dry shelter, where at St. Denis people are breathalyzed, and, you know, that's part of what's different.
Well, and I also think because of that vulnerability, that the people that are not welcome in the shelter and interfaith are hanging outside preying on the most vulnerable. And that's where we're like missing the piece here, the link. And, you know, I got some numbers from the fire department, and they have like 171 calls for the fire department for 911 responses just for this year. I didn't get PD yet, but I'm sure that's fairly high. And then the mobile integrated health operation, the program that we have, they go to the shelter daily. And so there's a lot going on. So I guess, and I don't know if anyone from the police department is on, but I want to know what their commitment is to handle some of the situations that we're dealing with right now in the neighborhood and around the shelter. And was there anyone, I don't know if anyone is still on from PD.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, it's Andrew Padilla here. I'm here.
Thank you, Chief. Can you talk a little bit about that and commitments to really digging into this deeper issue that we have and what's happening outside of the shelter premises?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Counselor, you guys have all nailed some good nails and hit the nail on the head there, that it's all about outreach. And that's what we're definitely going to try to increase our presence there starting on Saturday, the 17th of October. We're going to have our pedal bike officers in the area up until January 8th, just to kind of give that calming effect to that neighborhood and that business district, given a circumference or radius around Pete's that'll cross over to the Silver Saddle Motel, Jorgensen, Rufina Street, to address some of these concerns, giving us that 7-day coverage. Those officers will primarily be working during the daytime, but we're also obviously encouraging the graveyard officers and swing shift officers to be there. But the component that we're going to try to do, as we did last year during Operation Helping Hand, is working along with MIHO program and getting the people that are banned or not banned. And like I said, we're going to take come as you are, as you mentioned a bit ago. We're going to help everyone and anyone. So if there is someone that's outside and they are banned from the location, they're committing a crime, well, we all know what we're going to be able to do at that point. We know that being homeless is not a crime, but if we obviously catch someone using narcotics, selling narcotics, peeing, and we witness it in someone's driveway or nook and cranny alleyway, and we witness it, we're going to take them off to the jail. But acknowledging that some individuals, if they're willing to accept the help and get them into some type of program through LifeLink or Connect, through the MIHO program, through the Thrive program, we're going to definitely do that. We had a good success last year. And I think by dedicating these officers there again and working with the shelter, we'll be able to help the shelter out. And then obviously definitely what we're all concerned about is that community. But between the January 1st of 2019 through December 31st of 2019, we responded to the location of Pete's Place 564 times. January 1st of this year through September 28th, we have responded 408 times. So we are definitely going to be there in that area starting October 17th through January 8th of 2021, just to give that calming effect to that neighborhood. And to dispel one rumor that's out there is that the police don't respond at all. That is totally incorrect. And I understand the frustration when someone may say that police never responded, or maybe they don't see a police car. We acknowledge that there's many calls for service throughout the whole city that drain resources or based upon their priority, the officers are responding to. So I understand the frustration of the neighborhood, and I apologize to the neighborhood. But if someone complains and says that the officer didn't respond at all, that's totally incorrect. We may not respond in 5-10 minutes. It might be 30 minutes later, or it might be 3 hours later. But I encourage that constituent to call back the dispatch center, ask to speak to a dispatch supervisor or a police supervisor who's on duty, and say, hey, look, I live at this location. I called the police at 5 p.m. reporting someone that was urinating in my front yard. And that supervisor, whether it's on the police side or on the dispatch center side, should say, yes, an officer was dispatched at 6 p.m. They searched the area and they did not locate anyone. And although the resident might not see them, at least the supervisor can let them know that, hey, look, we did respond, but we apologize that it was 1 hour later.
Thanks, Chief. I think what's challenging though is because of the time frame and because the officers didn't witness it, then it's almost like it didn't happen. And then there's nothing that's really solved by that. And so I think, I mean, I'm happy to hear that you're going to have a team. Did you say it was the bicycle team that will respond starting mid-October through January 8th?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, yes, I did. Okay.
I think I just don't, yeah, I really want us to try to figure this out because your officers don't witness something, then it's almost like it didn't happen. So I don't know, I'm at a loss with that one right now. I'm just trying to figure out a way that there's a community effort and that I think it'll help to have that regular patrol. Yeah, I guess maybe I should stop talking and let my colleagues ask the questions. There was just a lot I had on my mind. Yeah.
Are you done, Counselor?
Yep, I'm gonna stop right
I am now chairing the committee for Counselor Abeta, who had to step away for professional reasons of his other job. I guess before we take more questions, I would just remind everybody that we do have the opportunity to have more of this kind of conversation at the Quality of Life Committee on Wednesday night. I know Councilor Lindell sits on this committee, and so this is an important conversation for her to hear. So I recognize that it's appropriate here too, but just want everybody to know there's more time for this conversation on Wednesday when the Quality of Life Committee grapples with some of the same issues. Councilor Cassett-Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Councilor Romero-Worth. Yeah, I had also pulled this item. Councilor Villarreal, thank you for really the in-depth questioning. You covered quite a bit of what I wanted to discuss. And I do really appreciate you starting to broach this very hard conversation about, as you mentioned, the elephant in the room. And I think that it is important that as we have this conversation that we can hold both truths, that the shelter is necessary and provides incredibly crucial and important work in our homelessness outreach, and that there is a negative impact on the businesses and neighborhoods. I struggle with the same that ex-Councilor Villarreal, and that I think that we all are struggling with is who and how do we start to address some of these impacts. And I think one of the questions that I don't believe that we are going to have answered in the next 2 weeks and through the committee process, but I think what I really need to see is a structure for how we are dealing with this problem. I don't think that this is something that we can say at the end of the lease, we're going to have a solution. We need to be working through this lease process to be identifying what are some of the solutions, what are some of the things that have worked and that haven't worked. And that I think in order to do that, we do have to both have this very honest conversation as well as recognize that there are things that every single one of the partners in here probably need to be doing differently. And that we need to be sitting down and having these conversations. I do want to make a pitch as well. I know that we talk a lot about Harrison, we talk a lot about Jorgensen. As individuals are chased out of those areas, because sometimes it is simply, showing up, telling somebody to leave, they do cross Cerrillos and they come over into my district. And I hear a lot about it from the neighborhoods that are across Cerrillos that are surrounding Franklin Miles Park. I know that we have extra security going there. the park on, of course, losing the name now, on Camino Carlos Rey, where there was a mountain lion the other day. That park is also a hotbed of activity that I know that people will trek from around the Pete's area and pop over there. We have a lot of issues around Clark Road, Clark Court. So as we are talking about, what are the surrounding areas that are impacted, it's not just the directly adjacent properties and directly adjacent streets. This is really impacting a large swath of community that is around. We've just had a meeting with the Rufina Business Group about challenges they're having. I don't know how we track, how far is the piece. And again, I don't believe that we are going to have answers today or at quality of life, or even by the time we see this at council again. And maybe Kira, you are the individual to help me understand where is the process? Where is the pieces that we are going to be coming up with new solutions to try in the next 3 to 6 months? Because honestly, it's not something that is sustainable for these communities right now. And again, I want to emphasize that the services provided by Pete's are crucial. And I want to make sure that those do not get sacrificed. And so we do need to be looking at these solutions. And I'm curious what the process is to really start being aggressive here.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I think that Built for Zero does offer a really strong framework and process. 13 communities around the United States have ended chronic homelessness using this framework. It's taken them years, but they have essentially reached what's called functional zero, which is, it's very temporary and unusual that people are homeless. Pete's was, as everyone knows, founded because there were 21 hypothermia deaths in the year before it began, and that will always be something that we need to address in this community and make sure it doesn't happen in this community. But in terms of a process for bringing all of the partners together, I do have faith that we don't have to invent the wheel. This has been done in other communities. That's about ending homelessness. That's not about ending crime, though. That's another related element. And so I think the process of the fire department with its NEHO program and also its entire team devoted to health and safety in the form of making sure people aren't too cold and have a place to go during cold temperatures in our Code Blue policy, the police department, the community services department, and the framework of emergency management, which says this is an emergency because this is what we're hearing tonight. This is really a community emergency on some level, this impact. What are the ways that we can put a stake in the ground together as those divisions coming together, state a goal, which is that we want the community around to be healthy and safe, and we want the community inside Pete's to be healthy and safe, and work together. And just, I'm already seeing it as we begin to meet and troubleshoot how we're going to address the fact that we need to keep the census low at shelters coming this winter, and we probably need another option, et cetera. So just, it's not a very abstract thing, but when you have a shared goal and you're all in the same meeting and you're all at the same table and you're trying to say, well, I can lend this resource, I can lend that resource, I think that will have an impact on this issue, and I'm hopeful about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Kira. I think it is interesting, the timing, considering that this is, we are just now bringing all these parties together. I will be really curious to see how we, I ask about this a lot, but how do we measure impact? And so that will be something else that I really want to make sure that we are talking about. How is that impact measured? I know that there are components of, we can measure call volumes and some other pieces, but I just really want to encourage all parties involved you know, and I believe that the county also does have a role somewhere in, they're there. We haven't spoken about them much, but I would encourage to ensure that they're involved too. But I just want to make sure that everybody is thinking about how we need to do things differently. I think that we frequently have this, you know, I'm doing a really good job, and it's true. There are things that are working extremely well. There are things that are extremely necessary. But at the city, at the shelter, with all of our community partners, I think that we need to take a hard look and say, there are things that we are doing that are working, but there are things that are not working for our community, and we need to be willing to be humble enough to say we all need to be doing more. And I know that it's hard because we are all resource strapped, and these are extremely complex issues. These are individuals that as Kira said, there are high needs individuals, and we unfortunately do not have the resources to be moving forward. I also think it's important that we think about this in terms of a spectrum of the different things that we see at the city council, that what is happening at Pete's is related to what's happening with affordable housing, that without having affordable housing, without having transitional housing, we are putting more pressure on Pete's, and that is going to drain their resources, and that is going to make it harder for them to be able to address what's going inside, as well as help be part of the solution for what is going on outside. And so as we're having these conversations, I think that those chains of connection are absolutely crucial to be moving forward with. As Councilor Romero-Worth said, we will also have an opportunity to speak with this at Quality of Life. So I will be interested, you know, if there's any kind of thought as people are mulling over this in the next couple days, to be hearing more about that. But I think setting up kind of a process, a system, whether it's you know, best through Quality of Life or through another mechanism for us to really be, I think we need to stay on top of this. And I think that there needs to be a system in place that we are really staying on top of this, of making sure that progress is being made and that we are asking ourselves the really hard question of where are we all falling short. So thank you. I do suppose that was a bit of a soapbox, but again, Councilor Villarreal was very thorough with her questioning. So I didn't really have many more, but I do appreciate the time and that we are having this conversation as we need to have it.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank everybody for being here tonight. Just want to look at a couple of specific things in the lease, and then I want to ask some more general type questions. In the packet, item 6 is no individuals who are acting in a way that is a danger to others shall be allowed to remain on the premises. Leasees shall seek assistance from St. Vincent's Hospital or other appropriate service provider for individuals who are a danger to themselves. Why is this written this way? This doesn't really seem very comprehensive to me, or that it's why do we only seek assistance when they're danger to themselves? This is a part of the lease. This is a contractual agreement, and no individuals who are acting in a way that is a danger to others shall be allowed to remain on the premises. This seems to be, to me, and I don't know how contractually you enforce that. Who asked for this to be in the lease?
Ms. Salazar.
Chair, committee members, in terms of the lease provisions, a lot of these lease provisions we grabbed from other leases. And so we did place this in the lease in thinking about overdose and thinking about people who are suicidal and placing this in here in terms of that. If that is a provision that the committee would like to change or remove, we are happy to do so.
Well, let me ask Joe. Joe, do you think that this is something contractually that you want to agree to?
Well, first of all, we're doing all of that already. If anyone is a danger to themselves, we certainly, call for the ambulance, we send them to the hospital, etc. And if they're a danger to others, then we put them off the property. So that already is in existence, just so you know. Whether it should be a part of the lease or not, I'm not sure, but it's a practice that we do all the time.
So when you put someone off the property, where do they go? What happens?
We give people a choice, and the choice we give them, because most incidents either involve a substance, even those incidents that might turn into something violent. So what we do is the choice we give them. If you go to detox, not necessarily rehab, you go to detox, we'll take you back. We're trying to help them to get something to stick. You never know what's going to stick in this world. So we give them this option that, you never have to be out in the cold. If you go to detox, we'll take you back when you're done with the detox. So we do give them that choice, and it's really up to them. A lot of people take that choice because they don't want to be out in the cold, but there are other people who don't.
Can you give me any idea of how many people you think went to detox last year?
I don't have that figure directly in front of me, but quite a few went either to detox and or rehab, just so you know. And along with a whole group of people like Kira had said, who have been housed.
Is part of the mission of the shelter to find housing?
We find housing for our guests through our partner providers. So last year, the LifeLink and the VA were the primary people who found housing for many of our guests, well over 100. So, and some people, we work really diligently to return them to home or to the Pueblo, depending on where they came from. So, I think we were in a neighborhood of about 150 people last year who were housed or returned to family or Pueblo.
Do we have an active program, active communication channel all the time with the Pueblo?
I have contacts primarily at SD, Santo Domingo, that I utilize. Actually, Santo Domingo for a long time had their spiritual leader, their medicine man here, providing counseling for their guests who were here from Santo Domingo. Santo Domingo is one of the more traditional Pueblos, and for a long time, they had a zero tolerance policy. So those people would end up on the streets of Santa Fe and subsequently with us. But I have a connection with a woman.
Has that changed?
Yeah, it's changed because they developed a wellness center on the Pueblo itself. So, and I have a relationship with one of the people at the wellness center. I also want to say, just so you know, because we're always working at this, PMS has provided us with a clinician that we share with Miho, who comes to the shelter. PMS has also applied to the Health Funder Alliance to get us a full-time clinician located at the shelter 5 days a week. So the fact that we have people with mental health issues, we're working really diligently with the appropriate agency, which in this case would be Presbyterian Medical Services, to get those services here at the shelter.
Chief Padilla, are you still on?
Can I just say one?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
Sure. I just want people to know that in the last couple of days, Chief Padilla and myself have been in contact about the officers being assigned here. I gave him a list of the people who literally hang out on that street, those who are banned and those who are not banned. I also gave him Janelle's phone number. She is a supervisor of the LifeLink outreach team that is located in this building so that they could work with the police department to get services for those people out on Harrison. And Chief Padilla could answer the rest of the question.
Are you on, Chief?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, I am.
So how many people will be on the bike squad that's going to be over at the interfaith area?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, it'll be a total of 4 pedal bike officers and 1 supervisor, so a total of 5.
Can they ride separately instead of all riding around in a peloton, which is how I typically see them riding around?
Yes, that is correct. They've been given the direction that they're going to ride separately. When you see them there in the downtown area, you usually see that public safety aide trailing along with them. That public safety aide would handle the low-level reports. But yes, they're going to be riding separately. They will not be together. Unless
Well, I
it's
think that we cover more ground and give more presence that way. We met a while ago and had identified a list of 10 to 15 people that were chronically loitering around the shelter that had been told that they were not allowed to be at the shelter. We identified them, and I'll ask Joe, what happened with that?
A lot of those people are no longer outside. There's a whole new crew of people. Some of them are the same. Some of them are pretty resilient in many ways. And some of them are working with MIHO. The people who have been there longer are working with the MIHO team. And I also identified, I believe I did for Chief Padilla, the people who were working with MIHO. So, but a lot of people, the population changes. The population that is here this year will not be here 2 years from now. One of the things that I'm concerned about, and Kira and I have had this discussion briefly, which is there are new people in town that we know nothing about or where they're coming from, and we are trying to get a handle on that. In my report to the food depot, actually, I identified 144 new people in the last quarter. So we are trying to figure out where these people are coming from and who they are. So they're not necessarily going to be at the shelter, but but there are new people. If you drive around town, I mean, I drive around town and I see people I've never seen before. And they don't necessarily come to our shelter, just so you know.
So I appreciate how thorough Councilor Villarreal was. She asked a lot of things that were on my mind. And she's right. I never hear from St. E's, ever. How about the needle exchange program? Is that really working? I get constant reports from people on Harrison Road that their road is littered with needles.
We have not had a needle exchange in the building for well over a year.
Isn't there one really nearby?
There's one on Rafina, but we have not had a needle exchange in the program for a year and a half.
On that point, Councilor Lindell.
Sure.
I've seen a drop box or a needle exchange, or I don't know if it's just a drop box right outside your gate.
Not us, no.
There's no needle drop box there?
No, and we clean up around every day. I have staff going around cleaning around the entire block. And so the most problems we have with needles that we find, and it's not as many it used to be, are across the street where people hang out. And that's the area that we're talking about monitoring.
So, how long has it been since Interfaith has had a meeting with the neighborhood?
That's really, the city organizes those meetings and we attend with our neighbors.
Well, I think that it might be time that we start to have those meetings on a pretty regular basis with interfaith and the neighborhood and the police. Because certainly the people on Harrison Road have absolutely, and some of the businesses also, I mean, they're at a point of massive frustration. We all know that. It's nothing new. And to continue to ignore them and to not bring them in to try to make suggestions and solutions. I mean, their solution is this: move that shelter. That's their solution. I think there's some other things that we could do to relieve some of the pressure on the neighborhood. I also think that we probably could do better at some point in time. You know, I don't think that the current location is so special. I just think that it's a location that's used and it has a history. I mean, I'd like to think that we really could do better, that it could be a workable location. It could be a building that is better than the building that you have now that we've just continually try to upgrade and do repairs to. I mean, there must be bigger plans of having all the needs met of what a shelter needs. And I'm not convinced that that building, I mean, it's just a building that continually gets renovated and changed, and we're trying to make it meet the needs of a population that need all the help that we can muster. We have an astounding group of volunteers. But I think we kind of keep some blinders on about how this could work. I mean, I sent an email to somebody with some of the complaints of the neighborhoods and the businesses, and their reply to me was, well, they knew it was there when they moved there. That's not a good reply. That means that we accept that we can't do better. Councilor Villarreal and I have worked diligently for years to try to get lighting onto Harrison Road. I mean, we've pushed and pushed and pushed and begged and asked. And this is the first year that it looks like we might get there. We ask a lot of the residents on that road. And that's not a reflection, Joe, that I think that you aren't doing a good job, because you and I talk, and just think that maybe we can put some of our energies in a little different direction. But I think that having interaction with the neighborhood and the police and the interfaith on a more regular basis would be a good idea. And I also think that it would make it so that, you know, when those meetings happen, instead of them being once a year or once every other year, where people have gotten such a head of steam that there can't be any kind of conversation, those don't do any of us any good. It doesn't help. And I hope that we have renewed commitment by the police department. We had a meeting a number of months ago, and we identified people, and I hope that we can re-up the commitment that we had then, that somehow seemed to get diminished or diluted somehow. But we need to put efforts into this. I see you have something on this point, Counselor Romero Worth?
No, Counselor, I thought maybe you were wrapping up and I just wanted to.
Everybody wants me to.
And because I was co-chairing, I can't raise my blue hand. So I was
All
raising
right,
my
then-
finger.
Because you've been so nice about it, I'm going to yield the floor.
Well, no, go right ahead. You sounded like you were working to an end there.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. I can't think of the end, and that's all that everyone else can think about. So I'll let it go at that.
Thank you, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue this conversation Wednesday night at the Quality of Life Committee with some overlapping counselors, some counselors that don't sit on finance. I'm going to save my questions, I guess, for then, and wonder if we might entertain a motion to move this forward to the Quality of Life Committee as it's written.
Yes, do you want to make the motion, Councilwoman?
I would move that we move it forward to the Quality of Life Committee as it's written.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Sage Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
For the purposes of more discussion on Wednesday, yes.
okay, Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So that concludes the items that were on the consent calendar. Matters from staff. Ms.
Mr.
McCoy.
Chair, councilors, we have no updates at this time.
Okay, thank you. Matters from the committee. Okay, matters from the chair. The only thing I have is our next meeting is October 19th, 2020. Thank you for the discussion this evening and for allowing us to hear this at this Finance Committee agenda. I probably learned as chair that issues like this would have probably been better going to the other committees first and then maybe finance last, so we could just focus on the items related to the lease itself. But given the time crunch, I guess that's fine that it worked out that way, but I will be more cognizant about deferring until the other committees hear items like this first. Thank you. So with that, we are adjourned.